Hello everyone. Welcome to today's IEN Talk with the IOTA Foundation's Head of Smart Cities, Mathew Yarger. My name is Terry Shane, and I'm really looking forward to the chat that we're going to have with Matt. For those of you who aren't familiar with his background, um, he's got a deep history in network and cybersecurity. He's a distinguished 8-year combat veteran, a DoD certified forensic examiner, a certified ethical hacker, and an experienced project manager. Since joining the IOTA Foundation, he's been involved with a number of projects, most notably the Alvarium project, which is part of an open collaboration with the Linux Foundation and Dell Technologies. Matt has also been deeply involved in the Unified Identity Protocol for self-sovereign identity and the FIWARE open source initiative for next generation smart solutions that deliver data validation and data sharing from the edge. Matt, it's absolutely great to have you here.
Hey, Terry. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. All right. I'd love to get to know what you've been up to lately and what progress you've been making in the Project Alvarium initiative in just a moment. But first, I'm really interested to hear your perspective on your current role at IOTA Foundation, how
Mhm.
that's changed since you've joined, and how you see that changing as IOTA moves towards Chrysalis and the next iteration of the Tangle on the path to a fully decentralized, scalable, and coolest world with Go Shimmer. Over to you.
Thanks. So my role has changed quite a bit since I joined the foundation. Originally, I came from federal government work, working at Department of Defense Cybercrime Center and at the National Security Agency before that, and doing things in that area. And I really started to get into IOTA for what it could do for changing the way that like data and networking are secured. So I did some internal research at that point and thought of some really cool projects and solutions that could be built with it. But when I came in as a senior research engineer. So I was working on researching networking technologies and auto peering and how to secure those and what kind of effect they're going to have on the network and the Tangle as a whole. But I realized coming in early because I'd been working unofficially with the foundation since 2017, I think in November to December 2017, so right when it was
Mm-hmm.
instantiated. And then I officially made the big jump from federal government safety network to this crazy crypto blockchain world in May of 2018. I just kind of
Without a
went down.
parachute.
Yeah, no parachute at all. Luckily, I haven't hit the ground yet, so it's been a good ride. But yeah, so I made that jump in May of 2018, and I decided, this technology is just so interesting to me. I have to be a part of it, and I really want to like contribute to what we're building here because I think it's going to have a huge impact on everything when it comes to technology. But one thing I noticed after I came in is that in that senior research engineer position is we were still such a young organization, and we still had so many things to learn about what it means to be an organization. So coming from that like strong government and military background, obviously like operations and structure and all those are really strong with me. I mean, when I was in my previous roles in the military, I would have regular briefings with 2, 3, 4 star generals. So I understood how things worked at a high level and a low level. And I've really tried to contribute internally a lot. So a lot of people might not see me publicly too much because I went from not having any social presence to now all of a sudden being in this crazy world. So there's been a transition there for me. But yeah, it's been an amazing shift going from being deep in the technology to helping the foundation professionalize, understanding standardization processes and changing the way we're actually doing our research and engineering and our standards development, really helping enable like Mike Bennett and OMG and getting to know everything going on there. And then taking my government and federal background and bringing that into smart cities. So it's been very useful for that because it gives them a sense of trust because obviously I've worked in a very trust required environment. There's very high standards to get into that kind of work in the first place. And so coming to different cities and saying, hey, this is where I've been and this is what I've done and this is how I think we can make an impact on your city and help you get really smart and start to share data with your different departments and your different partners and everything, has been a huge learning experience. And it's been just and way more enjoyable than I expected it to be. I never thought I'd be at a company for more than 3 years because I'm used to that military bounce around situation.
Right.
But I don't honestly. It's hard for me to ever imagine leaving the foundation at this point because I really enjoy what I do every single day so much. One of the big shifts that's happening though is just next week I'll actually be transitioning from the head of smart cities, and also I'm informally the head of product. We've been doing a lot of product refinements internally, which I'd love to talk
Right.
about later. But I'm also transitioning to the head of mobility and automotive.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I love working with Anne. She has been a blessing to the foundation. I've learned so much from her, and she is a superstar in her own right. Like how she presents things and how she just gets into these conversations has really been amazing to watch. But she's decided that she wants to come back stateside, and she has some personal reasons for that, which it's not up to me to disclose. But she's really excited to come back and be around family and everything, because she is
Hmm.
from the U.S. But I'm really excited to have learned from her and to really be taking over in this realm. And personally, I'm a huge gearhead, so I'm super excited about that too.
Yeah. Well, I know Anne myself. I count her as a good friend as well as a sort of an associate. So
Hmm.
I wish her the very best of luck, and she's been an amazing asset for the IOTA Foundation
Yeah.
and for the mobility sector. So I think that's fantastic. But obviously, the future is just around the corner, and with some of the
Hmm.
announcements going on, there's some really exciting things coming up. So. Um, as head of smart cities, what else can you share with us about some of IOTA's smart city initiatives? Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about the Powerhouse initiative in
Hmm.
Trondheim. Love to know how that trial is progressing and if they're looking to expand that. And any other results from the city exchange project that was using IOTA for local energy trading, and other smart city initiatives that you can share with us, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So from the smart city perspective, it's been a massive learning experience for the foundation and myself personally. Cities move very slowly, but when they do move, they move in
Yeah.
very big ways. There's a lot of different stakeholders. There's a lot of regulatory requirements you have to get through. There's a lot of education that needs to happen, because it's
Hmm.
a lot of political people and regulators and people with very strong legal backgrounds or things in that nature. But not many of them understand technology, and then
Yep.
not just getting them to understand technology, but getting them to understand the very like tip of the spear or the bleeding edge of the future of technology.
Yep.
It's a lot for them to grasp. But the cities we're speaking to have just picked it up in amazing ways, and they've been so supportive. With Trondheim specifically, everything we're doing there through the City Exchange has just been amazing with all the vehicle to grid integrations and positive and negative districts and transactive energy tracing. Like, there's so much going on in that sphere, and there's so much potential for it that like it's extremely exciting to watch what's going on there. And having the ability through the EU Horizon 2020 grant and all the different participants there to scale what's going on as we continue our pilots and build these relationships, is really looking very hopeful. So I'm excited about what's going to be happening over the next year or two in that area and the different partners that are starting to get involved with that too. Um, with the U.S. cities, we've been very focused on the city of Austin. Of course, we don't have a huge U.S. workforce. I'm one of the few that are here, and I
Right.
speak with at this point almost every department in the city of Austin and a ton of different organizations. So there's a lot of time that's required to do that. There's webinars, there's face-to-face meetings. We're talking to regional mobility authorities. We're talking about tolling projects and data and smart parking and computer vision and all these different things that they're trying to understand. And then the big thing they've really started to take hold of when it comes to IOTA and where blockchain has a big impact is how that's going to change their infrastructure. So from my background, I'm very familiar with the way that's set up.
Right.
And I see that a lot of our infrastructure is not technology enabled, or it hasn't been updated since the 90s and sometimes since the 70s.
Yep.
So that's a huge risk for them to make that big jump, and there's a lot of steps you have to take to get through that process. But them starting to understand how IOTA is different, and how we're not just a node that you put on a server that then puts a hash on a blockchain, but we're a node that you can put on a device, or you can virtualize on a smartphone and put in your infrastructure, and you can use as a transport mechanism to actually have like full trust all the way along, has been a huge mind shift for them.
Right.
And they're very, very excited about it. And they've brought us into a lot of conversations, and we brought them into a lot of conversations with different partners globally. And that's happening in our city network as a whole. It's expanding very organically. We don't want to be the type of foundation that adds 15 cities this year but doesn't do anything with any of them.
Right.
We want to focus on a few key cities, dig really deep, spread our roots, and let the different departments and areas understand what can happen and what their future in smart cities can look like, and kind of take it from there.
So what's the biggest challenge you face when, talking to politicians and bureaucrats and even people in IT at the sort of the city level, when you're talking about IOTA versus better known public and private blockchain technologies? What are the biggest challenges you face from that perspective?
Um, so a lot of the challenges are getting them to understand the technology aspects. So I can't dig into the weeds too much into the technology, because when you do that with a politician, their eyes are going to glaze over and they're going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
Um, so you have to make it relevant. And making it relevant is always a curve depending on who you're talking to. So you have to understand the people that you're really working with first, and then you have to understand the problems that they face every day, and what their major pain points are when they go to work in the morning. Like, what do they dread having to deal with? And then you have to start to really understand, what can we do as a technology to help with that aspect, because that's when they start to listen, and that's when they start to really pick up on, oh, hey, like, this is a huge time set for me, this is a huge resource step, but if I can do something lightweight and I can implement this in my process, now I'm saving 2, 3, 4% of my overhead, and 2, 3, 4% for a city is millions and millions of
Massive.
dollars. Yeah, it's huge. So small gains like that are massive. The other aspect is we get a lot of support from the political realm because of the things we're doing with Julie through like a NAPA. I mean, of course, she's left us at this point, but she's still a very close advisor, and we still speak with her very regularly. And I was under her for the last year and a half, so I learned a ton about the regulatory sphere that I wasn't familiar with.
Right.
So we have a lot of stakes we've put in the ground, that others just can't bring to the table. And having someone like her still on our list, and having our relationships with the EU and the NAPA and everything, getting them to understand that, like, what we're doing is EU based, but we can take those projects and those pilots and everything we're learning in the EU, and we can really take technology and data policy and things like that nature and guide what's happening in the US. Because when it comes from that perspective, the EU is very much ahead when it comes to data policy and privacy and things like that with GDPR. So the regulatory sphere is very interested in how they can start to adapt their policies and regulations, and that can be a very deep conversation that takes a lot of time. And then showing them how it's going to make an impact, not just on them, but the people
Right.
that they're charged with. Like, how is it going to impact the resident? What am I going to do as a resident of Austin, and how am I going to see the technology actually make an impact in my life?
Yep.
So that's one thing that I think we do really, really well now. It's been an experience over the last 2 years for us to go from, here's these massive 200-page white papers and mathematical dissertations and everything, and now it's more like, here's a design jam, let's sit down and really hash out some things, pop up a Miro board, do some virtual whiteboarding, and like show you what this can look like. So
Right.
it's been really cool.
And on the legislation and sort of infrastructure sort of components there, I don't know the effect that this has. But last week, obviously, we got the interpretive letter from the Office of the
Hmm.
Controller of the Currency, authorizing U.S. national banks to actually start providing custody services for crypto. I don't know if that's more a question for Dan, but presumably that has to be helpful for a city when they're starting to talk to you, especially if there are value transfers,
Yeah,
that they
very
can
much so.
actually offset some of that counterparty risk by having custody solutions.
Hmm. Yeah, very much so. So that's going to be a huge resource or reference that we can use now,
Hmm.
and that's been the biggest blocker, honestly, from my perspective, dealing with cities when it comes to token use, because all the other systems out there are great, but they're all focused on value transfer and decentralizing financial capabilities and all this stuff, which is monumental. It's going to have huge impacts in the financial sphere. But
Right.
until regulation is there, adoption doesn't happen. So that's one thing we've been able to leverage that others haven't in the same context, because we can do that data transport and that data verification all the way from where the data is created. So that's opened up a ton of conversations. But now being able to say, hey, not only can you take what we're doing and what you're learning about how to change the way you manage and share data in your city, but you can also start to use this function of the token that we have. It's not something you need to be scared of anymore. You just need to communicate with your consignment organization, or concessionaires, not consignment organizations. You need to talk with your concessionaires. You need to talk with your local banking institutions. And you need to start to find which ones are willing to take that first step to actually
Right.
start to implement these, because that's when full settlement layer comes in, data and value being tied together, and robust solutions comes in. So that's going to be extremely useful for moving things forward.
So, how long do you think it'll be before the average citizen notices that their city is becoming smart? Or do you think that they'll just never notice? It'll just be a slow, evolution that nobody notices until they look back 10 years.
Yeah, that depends on the city, because some cities are a lot more agile than other cities. So there's been a lot of strategy around that from our perspective too. Trying to figure out, what cities are agile, which ones have funding for innovation, because that's another limiting factor with cities. They don't fund innovation almost ever, period. The funding comes from grants, the funding comes from different proposals. It can come from P3 arrangements, but they, like cities as a whole, do not traditionally fund innovation. It's too risky for them. They have highway
Yep.
infrastructure and parking and 100,000 employees they have to take care of, so they can't divert large amounts of funding for innovation projects. But that's where you can get innovative with funding models too, and that's where multi-stakeholder relationships start to open up. And that's something that we really excel at the IOTA Foundation, is doing things like City Exchange, where we have 20, 30, 40 different partners, but we all have a piece to play and we're all working together very holistically and very
Right.
synchronously.
Cool. I see in the questions coming in from the audience, I can't resist this one. From Milan, any personal goals within IF? Do you see Elon Musk talking about IOTA within the next couple of years?
um, so that's a tough one. Tesla and Elon Musk is a beast in itself, and I mean,
Yeah.
from a business perspective, they don't work with other organizations. Period. If they see something they like and they want to adopt it, they do it, but they don't talk to you about it. So it's completely possible that they could be looking at what we're doing, integrating us into their systems, and we would never know it. The whole Tesla network could potentially be the Tangle, and we'd have no idea because it's on a private Tangle or something. Um,
Right.
but but getting that kind of open relationship with them is going to be difficult because they don't usually go that route.
I understand. I don't think Elon's school report came home with the comment, plays well with others.
Yeah, I mean, he's moving down here to Austin. Joe Rogan's moving down here to Austin. They're all good friends. So maybe I'll bump into him at Joe's Coffee or something, and be like, hey, we should
Sounds
totally
good.
do a podcast.
Sounds good. So that's all fantastic. Obviously, you're involved with identity and trust. What can you share with us about your work with Dell, the Linux Foundation, and the Alvarium project?
So identity is something that's just personally like a very deep interest of mine. I think that area and the solutions we build in identity are going to have a massive impact, not just on technology, but society as a whole. So I get very, very hopeful and optimistic when I start looking into what we can do. I took over a lot of the identity research and relationships very early on after I kind of transitioned out of that senior research engineer position. And since then, we've brought in Yella, and he has done a phenomenal job taking over. He's acting as a product manager for it and really leading up everything we're doing. He's nailing the relationships. He's nailing the strategy. And I'm super impressed with everything he's doing. But we have done a lot in that space around identity of people. We did the health passport demo to really see what does that look like? What does negotiating verifiable credentials across borders look like? Who are the stakeholders? It was a really good demo and experiment for us, and it's a really great reference point. But identity is going to be in everything, because taking something like what the Tangle offers and the ability to put a node all the way at the edge, all the way on an IoT gateway or an edge server or in a car or on a roadside unit or something like that is massive for all the different industries that it plays. Because then you get into identity of things with how do we create a vehicle identity? How do we create a digital twin of the vehicle? How do we create a digital twin of the city's infrastructure and the different pieces and components down to the sensor level? What does that look like? That's something that can completely be enabled feelessly as like a public right, honestly, through the way that the Tango operates. So it's been a big adjustment for us to really understand what that looks like, and scope out, not just identity of things, but identity of people, identity of organizations, potentially identity of processes and objects. So everything needs to be identified for some degree, at some degree, at some point in its life cycle, and being able to take something all the way from like the minerals and say, hey, these are the minerals that brought the sensor together, and this is that supply chain process now, and this is the identities of those different minerals and the different individuals that interacted with it along the supply chain, and the different vehicles and containers and everything that brought it into this Dell laptop that we have now. And now when you buy it, you have a full history that you can dig in and verify on, like, hey, I bought this laptop from Dell. It's a sustainably built and designed laptop. It comes from natural resources in good areas, not climate not climate. That's not what I'm looking for. Combat areas or hazard areas or anything like that. So having that level of granularity to be able to verify your devices and stuff, but in a way to where your privacy is preserved, is going to be huge. Dell is very aware of that, and they have been amazing to work with. They're a huge organization. I think they have like 150,000 employees, and that's just in Dell. That's not including their subsidiaries like VMware and everything else. So there's a lot of other conversations that can factor into that. But things have been progressing very well on Alvarium. I have weekly, sometimes multiple times a week calls with representatives from there. We're working towards implementing it into pilots. I can't really disclose a lot around that because I respect the NDAs and
Yes.
everything.
Is
But
there,
I
is there
have.
anything you can share? I mean, everybody's looking for something tangible.
Um, I can share that there will be some information on it in the near future.
Okay.
I don't want to overstep anything major, but yeah, they've really helped us refine like our product strategies and where it can come in with Alvarium. The big thing I can share is, at first we were at one point in the solution, and now we're looking at multiple cascading points of integration. So it's not just going to be, hey, here's a Hyperledger or IOTA integration for the application to verify that confidence score, but there's other areas now that we've identified that say, hey, this and this can all have IOTA integration, and you can have this capability all the way up that data lifecycle where you verify the confidence. So that's super exciting about what that looks like, and I really am super optimistic about where the conversations with them and others are going around Alvarium.
Cool. So if I was to push the edges here and ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how you would rank the likelihood that we'll see something real coming out of that initiative, how would you rank that?
Oh, I tend to think in ones and zeros still.
Okay.
So I'd give that a 1 for yeah, that's going to happen at some point. In a
Okay.
scale of 10, I'd probably give it an 11. Uh,
Awesome. Awesome. Well,
so
I like
something's going to
11s.
happen, and it's progressing very well.
Okay, cool. TF, I'm not sure who TF is, but TFMC is asking why Alvarium is not listed on the Linux website as an official project of the foundation.
Yeah. So there has been the decision to not commit the code yet because we really want to get it to the next level essentially. So that is still completely within what's going to happen. That's completely on the timeline, and we and they of course are committed to making that happen. But until it is committed to LF and exchanges that ownership from Dell to LF. It's still under Dell's purview.
Okay, all right, that's really cool. Um, I'm obviously a huge fan of IOTA and the foundation, but I was blown away today at the TM Forum talk that I attended. If you look at where IOTA is positioned, as the black box on which everything else is being configured for the deployment of devices at the edge, for the supply of services where IOTA essentially provides that assurance level. It's the sort of the unnamed, unsung hero that is the foundation on which everything else is built. And as we both know, you can't build a building unless it's got a solid infrastructure. You don't really look at the foundation, you look at what's above the ground, but the foundation is everything.
Yeah.
So it's a very exciting time.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
Mark Nixon's been doing an excellent job with that. He's got a really strong background in radio frequencies and understanding the really low level aspects of how that operates. So what he's doing there and the strides he's made are huge. And I've talked to some of those partners too, and they're so it's really inspiring to talk to them and just see like how excited they are about the waves that this is going to create in the industry. Because it's not like, oh, we did a little POC and we're going to throw it away, but these things are progressively getting more and more robust. More partners and, well, not partners, but more collaborators are coming into the projects under TM
mhm.
Forum. They're looking for ways to scale it into production. They're really understanding the impact it's going to make on the industry, and there's a lot of real commitment to what's going on there, and real inspiration that's coming into the telco industry. And that's an industry that outside of 5G, it doesn't necessarily have major steps forward in innovation all the time.
Right.
So having something where they can say, hey, we can take this permissionless structure for data and we can really take all the different providers and build solutions off of it now. And we can share the data that is relevant for all the different stakeholders in this conversation openly. And we can trust it because it's not just a hash on a block that's stored on a server and 100 other servers. It's from the infrastructure. It's from the pico cells and the micro cells on the side of the highway that can take what's happening when it comes to telco and the data that moves around it, and enable trust all the way up that delivery pipeline.
Okay. So we have another question here around standardization and regulation, that it's been a barrier to adoption. Um, so I'm interested, obviously, in your work with OMG around
Mhm.
standardization and regulation. But Chris is asking about other barriers that may be preventing adoption, and what are the main concerns of organizations? You sort of touched on that a little bit, but my guess is that as standardization becomes a bigger and bigger thing, we'll have a lot more of these corporations and organizations
Mhm.
willing to step in, and that of course ties in with Chrysalis as well on the next version of IOTA. But go ahead.
Yeah. So with the standardization aspect, that kind of goes back to that inward focus I took. So one thing about COVID is it's really given us as a foundation the opportunity to stop going to conferences and stop traveling and doing all these different things that we were doing, and really just hone in and focus. And that's been extremely beneficial as an organization. And part of that is where I kind of came into this with my product management experience and my structure and everything. And last fall, I went to an OMG meeting with Mike Bennett, who is really taken the reins of standardization, and just is completely changing the process there.
Okay.
So I sat down with them. I went to all the OMG standardization meetings. I wrote down the process, and I was like, what does this look like from OMG's perspective? What does it look like from Industrial Internet Consortium's perspective, SAEs, IEEE, OSI? Like, what are their standardization processes really look like? And how does that overlap with our development process? So going through that process with him and sitting down and just really like going over it and over and over it helped us understand that while it's been a barrier to adoption for a lot of different organizations, it's actually an accelerator for us now because we've been able to redefine how we build things internally and how the research aspects go into the engineering aspects, how the engineering of the core technologies and the layer two technologies then builds into potential open source products, completely changing the way our discussions go around, like what are we bringing to different industries. So the standards process is difficult, but we've changed the way we work as a foundation to really adapt to it. And now we have multiple points along the development timeline from research to engineering to product to market adoption that overlap with that standards process. So that's going to be accelerating on our side internally. Our conversations are accelerating with them. And it's not just one standard. There's not just, hey, here's the IOTA standard. It's, hey, here's, the DAG standard. Here's how you do decentralized data transfers and linkages over a DAG network. Here's how you can do value attestations and settlement between different fiats and stuff like that, which is, I don't think that's specifically one we're working on, but just kind of spitballing an idea there.
Okay.
There's a lot of different standards that are actually coming into play and getting structured right now, and they're all proceeding really well. But that's going to definitely help the regulatory side of things because then you have something that's solid to reference, and it's not just, hey, we built this, it's a standard, now you can use it. It's like, no, hey, we built this with 45 other universities looking at it and 250 other partners in the standards industry looking at it and really breaking it down to its granular details. And you can trust it because it's something that we haven't done ourselves anymore. It's something
Right.
that we're pushing out openly, and we're really getting a lot of input on how we do things.
So I'm kind of nervous to even ask this question, but it sounds so impressive. Who is IOTA competing with? What is IOTA competing with?
Oh,
Is there any competition? I mean, there doesn't seem to be another crypto out there that has this level of deep integrity and integration in all the levels. It's not just this tiny little niche that it's looking at. It's so broad. It's really difficult to comprehend just how big this is.
yeah. Dan likes to use this term that we came up with a lot, but connective fabric is really the way to look at it. And some people like to look at things as competition and competitively, but I really don't think that does justice to where we need to start to shift our mentalities from technology or in the technology specter. I mean, if anybody saw the Congress interview with Google and Facebook and Amazon and Apple
Oh
yesterday,
yeah.
it's very apparent that they do not like predatory practices. They do not like hyper competitive structures, and that's not what we're trying to do here. I think as an industry, there is competition, but the best thing is we all bring something different to the table. So while we have this aspect of sending data in near real time in a permissionless environment, having clusters through private tangles that overlap with each other that can be localized or context based. There's other things that Ethereum and Cardano and all these other guys bring to the table that we're not really focused on. So it's very possible to look at us as that transfer layer up to what they're focused on. So, getting the data from the STM32 setup on this light pole, pushing it through the tangle, and then maybe you've got an Ethereum node that takes it and does some smart contracting based off the data and the value transfer that happens over the tangle. These things can go if we have these conversations. We can build these if we have these conversations. But if we
Sure.
keep saying, hey, we're competition, we want to be better than them, it's never going to happen.
Got it. Okay, that's fantastic. And the TM Forum is a perfect example
Exactly.
where they're working in conjunction with our three quarter.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
And I think that's really one of the things that I'm excited about for the future of like our core technologies is taking things like that Hyperledger connector that we have
mm-hmm.
and expanding it to a Corda connector and then an Ethereum connector and a Cardano connector, and then saying how can we build holistic solutions together that are going to tackle just major issues in industries.
Awesome, awesome. So here we all are stuck at home in COVID. I was chatting with my banker just a couple of days ago, and he was saying that at the bank they've implemented pretty much a 5 year sort of technology roadmap in
Hmm.
3 months. You know, between
Yeah.
web conferencing and digital signing and things of that sort. Um, to what extent is IOTA beneficiary of COVID? Like that it's accelerating things with the drive towards touchless interfaces
Hmm.
and, you know, sort of smart apps and things like that. To what extent do you think that COVID will actually work in IOTA's favor?
So it's really brought the need for touchless technologies or contactless solutions into play. And it's really opened up a lot of organizations' eyes on, hey, maybe we don't need one major facility that has 50,000 employees in the center of Austin, for example.
Right.
Maybe the city is opened up to it as well, where their entire workforce had to go remote. And from a city perspective, that's extremely difficult. That was a huge transition for them, but they've done
Right.
a really good job of it. But now they understand, hey, remote working, I don't have to sit here and like have water cooler chats all day anymore. I have 8 hours where I'm just like massively productive. And things happen faster when you work remote. I mean, it's hard because I haven't
It is
seen many
hard.
friends in the last 6 months. So,
Yeah.
there's waves of depression and stuff that happen there. But when it comes to operating as a business or as an ecosystem, it's really opened up a lot of organizations' eyes to it. And we as a foundation, I mean, we were just well suited for it from the beginning. We have 110 employees in like 25 different countries, so we're pretty decentralized as an employee base, and we have been working virtualized since the very beginning. So it's not something that was really much of a learning curve for us, but it's made things faster when talking to other partners or potential partners or just educating different organizations on technologies because now they're really interested in it because they have to deal with it every day. Before they didn't have to deal with it, they could go
Right.
without their cell phone half the time. But now they're like, oh, wow, I need to think about like when I come into this, maybe I don't want to touch the door. When I check into this facility, maybe I don't want to have to go through a turnstile, but having a contactless solution would be better. When I go to an Airbnb, like, what if I don't want to interact with the person that owns it, but I actually want to go forward and have a way for my phone to verify who I am and transfer data and value to the host directly through the devices at the Airbnb. So there's different thoughts and innovation cycles that are going on now that you couldn't even have conversations about 6 months ago.
Okay. Cool. Another question from Hello IOTA. Do you expect meaningful adoption of IOTA before the underlying protocol is finalized? Do you think it can happen now? I.e., is adoption constrained by biz dev or engineering?
I would say no. I don't think it's constrained at all. I think it's been a very dynamic learning process for us. And that's one thing that a lot of individuals and organizations forget when they're not building these type of things that, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to iterate, but the faster you realize how to fix things and how to iterate, the faster it becomes something that's real. And that's something I mean, anybody in the community can look at us 2 years ago and look at where we're now and see the drastic shifts we've made in technology, going from nodes that don't go into sync and take 10 gigs to run to having things like Hornet, where you can run 10 virtualized Hornet nodes on my smartphone. Like, that's ridiculous. Um,
It is ridiculous.
like 250 megs of RAM requirement is something you can put on most IoT devices. And vehicles at this point are getting so much more processing power. But yeah, there's some things that were a hard shift. and there's some breaking changes coming in how the network works. But at the same time, when it comes to data use cases, those all transfer really easily. The value is what's going to have a major shift, and that's something as a foundation I think we're all looking forward to. But the data stuff transfers really well, and we have so many different things going on with the data realm until the organizations are comfortable with jumping into value, that
Right.
are happening on private tangles and things of that nature that we can't even talk about.
All right. Well, obviously don't want to talk about what we can't talk about, but what we can talk about, obviously in your new role in mobility, I saw the recent announcement that you, Dan, and Jens are going to be talking about IOTA as part of the Mobi Innovation Lecture Series, and that's just coming up on August the 19th.
Hmm.
So, what can you tell us about adoption of IOTA in the automotive industry beyond what we've heard publicly, around Jaguar Land Rover? Obviously, you haven't heard a lot about VW recently, but it would be great to know where IOTA is currently engaged in the automotive sector to the extent that you can share.
Yeah. I mean, one thing to keep in mind with this too is COVID has put a huge constraint on the automotive industry. With no one traveling anymore, no one going through tolling systems, no one going through parking systems. A lot of people have sold their vehicles. The demand for vehicles has gone down. The demand for different types of solutions for automation have gone up. So connected and autonomous vehicles, the interest there has picked up pace even more. But from an OEM perspective, it's a hard environment right now, and we are talking to multiple in the space. All of our relationships are still there, and they're just waiting for the economic uncertainty to kind of shift, which conveniently aligns up with our quarter side. So I mean, the a lot of the partnerships are still there and ready. They're just waiting for the right timing because they want to make sure, they don't want to implement something into a million vehicles and then have a breaking change that they have to completely redesign the solution in 6 months. That would just be silly. But understanding it and testing it and really building out the internal awareness of it is where a lot of the focus is, so that when the time comes, they're ready to execute. Um, and then with the Moby perspective, I'm really excited to become a part of that. I haven't spoke with Moby much in the past. Anne's been leading that, of course, and Jens is working with the supply chain working group there. But they have a lot of different mobility standards that they're working towards, and we've been able to really provide a lot of input into that, whether it's electric vehicle to grid charging standards, or mobility supply chains, and what the shipping logistics look like between different mobility providers, or mobility services in the supply chain industry, or vehicle IDs, which would be a really great example of identity of things based on our IOTA identity direction. Sorry, my dogs are being a little crazy. But yeah, I'm excited about it. Jens has been doing a great job. Anne's been doing a great job working in the EVGI working group, and we're excited for the call or the webinar next month, because they're at a point where they're really starting to focus on what DLTs can execute on what they're building. And I
Right.
think that's where the conversations get more real, because right now there's still uncertainty in the space, and they want to build the solutions from an application perspective to where they're going to be agnostic in as many ways as possible. But now that they've gotten to the point where they're at, it's a good time to see how we can start executing together on solutions.
Are we going to see a major brand sort of register odometer readings on the Tangle or adopt, auto IDs? Do you think
I
in my
think we will.
lifetime?
Definitely in your lifetime. I mean, you're still young, so you've got
Yeah.
plenty of time to see it. Uh, no, but I think it's definitely going to happen. We've got a lot of conversations in that space going around, vehicle identities and telemetry data and stuff like that, so that you can get product verification, or they can understand when parts are going bad and you have digital twins of parts. There's a lot of different conversations around that. That once you have this ability to take the data directly from the device, you can have a trusted digital twin of your AC condenser, and they can know what the lifespan of it looks like, and they can let you know ahead of time. It's like, oh, it's got this many miles, it's probably going to fail within the next 5,000 miles. So if you come in and do it proactively, it'll save you some time and money. But yeah, there's a lot of different conversations that come into that space, and I definitely think we're going to see some pretty big waves there in the next few years.
All right. Any brands you can mention, or do you want to plead the fifth on that?
I'm going to plead the fifth on that one for now.
Okay. Good. So, any other questions coming in from the audience? Would love to ask some additional stuff of Matt. I can scroll up here, but somebody actually, Pavel asked about the TM forum thing. If you're aware, if that's the public IOTA network or if that'll be a private
I,
permissioned tangle.
I believe most of that has happened over the DevNet and the testnet, from my understanding. I haven't been
Yes.
super hands-on with that, so I'm not 100% certain. So just kind of take my words as a grain of salt, if you will. But the biggest aspect of it is, yeah, there needs to be some level of permissionless integration there for the different stakeholders and different borders to really overlap with the solution, and that's
Right.
where our strength really comes in. But the other thing to keep in mind is, like, you can set up a private tangle and it can be permissioned, but taking it from a private tangle to a public tangle, if you're building a data solution, is just changing a configuration file. You take that entire private tangle, you change one or two of its nodes to auto pair with a different private tangle or with the public tangle. Through the configuration file, they synchronize, the data goes onto the public tangle, and your solution's open.
Wow.
It's that easy when it comes down to like opening data silos and data lakes that are built onto this kind of structure, and
Wow.
that's like a huge benefit for the industry, because sharing data and opening up those kind of lakes and structures is a huge hurdle. Whether it's from government agencies or departments and local governments or private partners and their internal groups, sharing data is really difficult right now. But just being able to change a configuration file and do a publisher subscriber model with something like IOTA Streams and say, oh, hey, now we want to open up this interlinked data stream that was built with streams over this private tangle and all the different devices that have been connected to it to this other tangle because the scale's there now, or we want to add new stakeholders because there's a new partnership or consortium agreement. It's an easy process, and that flexibility has just been really eye-opening for a lot of organizations.
Cool. So, as as someone who is so engaged with product, Bass asks a question here about solutions for onboarding regular people. Um, Most people wouldn't know how to take care of a seed if their life depended on it.
Hmm.
And I think that's a big area in crypto, and part of the reason why you'll see custody solutions. But then you get back to this whole fractional reserve, and are banks going to then be lending out based on the seeds that they keep on my behalf? Not my seed, not my money. Where do you see that going from a product perspective in terms of making life easier for the end consumer to incorporate IOTA in their day-to-day life?
So one of the things is we just had one of our internal products open up yesterday that I think is really exciting. So Daniel is the product owner and architect for IOTA Stronghold, and
Hmm.
that's going to come into play with that conversation a lot, because that's talking about how do you do secure secret management from device to device, from peer to peer. How do you do seed storage in a way to where you don't necessarily need to remember your seed, but maybe you can do a multi-factor authentication or a multi-factor biometric authentication, and it opens up your capabilities with that seed. So it's in a trusted execution environment. You don't have to know it, you don't have to worry about it, but it's just linked to you and that identity that you now have. So from a product perspective, we've got three that you know about. Um, of
Right.
course, there's IOTA Streams, there's IOTA Identity, and there's IOTA Stronghold. And we've taken a very simplistic naming structure because we want to make it as easy to understand as possible. Not everything needs a fancy new name that makes it sound like something that you're not familiar with. Half of it has existed in the industry, but it's converging with new technologies now, and that's what we're really doing. But with something like Stronghold and the new Trinity that's going to be coming out and everything, there's going to be massive implications of that, and I think you'll see sooner than you expect some pretty cool capabilities that you'll be able to use on a user perspective and in a real perspective, like individually. And then that's going to start to overlap with different solutions. So, how do you then manage your own data streams through IOTA streams and your identity? What do the keys to those streams look like, and how are they stored through Stronghold? These different
Okay.
products start to overlap for different types of solutions, and those are going to have direct impacts on everybody that's using them and the different industries that they're integrated into.
All right. Well, clearly you're pretty excited about all of this stuff, and at the risk of stepping on a landmine, you say sooner than I think. How soon will we see 1.5? The
Oh,
first,
geez.
yes. How soon? Because we were hoping for the end of July.
Hmm.
Before the
Well,
end
I
of
mean, that was
August, do
supposed
you
to be
think?
phase one, not the whole
You know,
thing.
no, no, no. But the phase one was before the
Yeah.
end of July. Do you think before the end of August?
Oh yeah, I mean we're doing the testing with it already on ComNet, and I mean I don't know if you saw the results of the spam test
Oh yeah,
yesterday,
oh
but
yeah.
12, 13, 1400 CTPS at sometimes, that's awesome numbers. And you have to think too, with the way our transactions are structured, every single transaction is a kilobyte plus some data. So that's a lot of data you can transfer from a single device or through a network too. It's not like others where their transaction might only be a few bytes of data. Our transactions are decently sized, but that gives a huge level of flexibility for what you can do with them. So 1300 TPS for us is, not maybe equivalent to 50,000 TPS for another chain.
Awesome, awesome. And as we sort of come to the top of the hour, very important questions here. Mark Schmidt wants to know how you stay so handsome.
Well, I've got an awesome wife, and she doesn't let me eat too many cupcakes anymore, so that helps. The
Okay,
COVID hair has actually worked out for me a little bit too. I haven't had a haircut since COVID started, so I mean, I'm actually kind of digging it. I've never had my hair this long. The army doesn't
that's
really
cool.
let you do that, so and I wash
That's
my
great.
face every day.
Okay, excellent, excellent. I got my first COVID haircut in 4 months last Friday,
Yeah.
so I was really, really happy about that. And several people have asked me if I'm going to play you out on the piano behind me. It is, of course, a completely fake background. I can't
Hey, you
let you
fooled
see the
me
real
too.
background. Yeah. So no, I don't play piano, but it does look good back there. But
Hmm.
Matt, I really want to thank you for taking time out from your busy day, and I know how busy those days are. You're like starting at 6 and running till 6 every day. I
Yeah,
don't
I mean,
think
some
people.
I've counted, and some weeks I have like 40 to 50 hour long meetings a week. It gets crazy sometimes, but yeah, I love it honestly.
Yeah, and I don't think people really appreciate the huge amount of work that is going on behind the scenes, not just from you, but from the broader population. And, people are impatient because they just want to see the numbers go up on their portfolio. But, if you think from the bigger perspective, I really just want to give a huge vote of thanks on behalf of the community, both the IEN and the broader IOTA community for the amazing work you guys are doing, for
Mhm.
the passion that you bring to everything, and for the incredible strides and advances that are being made. I really do want to thank you. And I think it's going to fundamentally change the way that all of us live our lives. So it's
Yeah.
been amazing.
I mean, I would like to thank the foundation too, because I've worked in some really exciting places before and done some pretty interesting things that I can't talk about. But the people I'm working with
Or
here
you
at the
have to kill
foundation,
us.
shh, we don't talk about that. No, but the people I work with here at the foundation are just massively impressing, and they are so driven. And I mean, I get messages from people on Saturdays and Sundays at 11 o'clock at night, and I see they've been working 12 hours on a Sunday, and
Yep.
it's not necessary most of the time. But they're so adamant about what we're doing here, and they're so passionate about making it a reality that it's not even work sometimes because everybody here
Yep.
loves what they do. But at the same time, it's a nonprofit, and people move on, and situations like Anne leaving us, she's been a huge asset to us, but that's also how the word gets out to other
Yep.
organizations. They take what they've learned here and they take it into their new organizations, and who knows? Next thing you know, maybe we'll be talking to some pretty interesting partners next.
Yeah, awesome. Again, thank you for being here. Thank you to your family for putting up with the crazy hours,
Yeah.
because I know
My
they have a
wife's an
lot to put up
angel.
with. She
I'm
is. She
surprised she
is.
hasn't murdered me yet.
Well, I met her when we were in Austin, and I
Mhm.
can attest to that. So thank her on behalf of the community. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I look forward to the next conversation. And good
All
luck with the
right.
Moby Talk in August. All right.
Thanks, Terry. You have a good one.
Fantastic. All right. Bye bye, everyone.